everybody. This is Taina with my guest Carson Green on the Third Stage Astrology channel. What we are discussing right now is a specific tendency that people have when they reach the end of first stage Aries. There's a trauma that occurs, and it's a trauma that has to do with unintentionally harming someone you care about. And it's not, Carson's got, I feel, a huge amount of courage to be talking about this. And it's I think it's a valuable thing if anybody else has gone through this experience. And it's, helpful even for you to get an expanded sense of why this happened and what it really means, which I think you've already had a little bit of a look at as far as, starting to understand what third stage astrology is about. Now, when you and I first talked, you warned me about something. You warned me that you're a skeptic. Remember that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I have very little knowledge of astrology. I've become aware of it somewhat through some of the people that I'm close with, like the person who introduced us, and I dated someone who was really into it, and so into it that caused my skepticism to be, to peel away quite a bit.
Right.
But I'm definitely
interesting.
I've had, like, I'm somewhere in where my experience with astrology is so many things resonate with me, and then like being skeptical about, is that because it's such general things that it would resonate with anyone, but then so many things seem so specific. So I don't know where I'm at, but I appreciate learning about it.
Yeah. And what I said to you when we had our initial conversation is that I value skeptics, and I feel it's really important in life to not just believe something just because you think it's a good idea. I think we should really analyze things. I don't think we should be taken in by stuff. I think we need to understand what's really going on, why it is the way it is. I started out as a skeptic. I actually didn't believe in astrology because to me it didn't make sense. The sun sign astrology and the newspaper predictions, it made no sense that there are only 12 destinies on a given day, and just because you happen to have been born in a certain month, you're going to have that destiny. And of course, that's not real astrology. That was brought into the public eye to try and generate interest in astrology and bring people to astrologers to discover what real astrology was all about. I didn't know that at the time. But, slowly, because of studying psychology and personality typing, I slowly started to learn about it. First, to kind of resurrect it. I didn't think it would be based on birthday. But eventually I started to notice there's so many things that fit, and that fit so precisely. The more I studied it, the more it proved itself to me. And I just think people should not be just jumping into something, because you can get yourself into trouble. You can go down a path of delusion for a really long time. And astrology, even for people who understand it quite well, it can be looked at into fatalistic a way. And that's a negative thing too, because we shouldn't be sitting inside afraid to go outside because of what the planets are doing. It's not the way life works. It's not the way astrology really works. It doesn't cause things to happen to us. It doesn't cause us to have a certain kind of personality. What it does instead is it's a reflection. It's a cosmic mirror that shows us who we really are, that shows us what are the deeper issues of our soul. It gives us that capacity to reflect and see. And it also is an expression of our oneness with life, and the way that the things that are going on in terms of larger planetary movements are in alignment with who we are and with what we need and with what we're expressing inwardly. So it's always really about us and our own true identity, and in a sense it's a tool of true free will. But people can look at it backwards, and they can look at all of life backwards. We can think that all these things that happen to us make us a certain way, and that's often a cop-out, because we have a lot of choice in terms of how we respond to stuff. So that's my little mini rant.
Okay.
Yeah, so actually, if you're listening to this and you have not listened to or watched the episode about the 3 stages of Aries, it would be useful to do that. It would help you to understand in more depth what it was we're talking about. We'll probably cover it here anyway, but we're going to be talking about what happens at the end of first stage Aries here. And Carson, did you want to start to share your story?
Yeah, sure. So my best friend, I grew up in San Diego. My best friend through the, end of high school is Eric. And he and I were pretty inseparable. Into high school, we call each other's mom, and we both ended up out in Colorado. And one year we traveled back to San Diego for the holidays, and then we were going to be helping set up a huge party for New Year's Eve back in Colorado. So we drove back to Colorado. We did it in like 16 hours and hadn't slept in probably a couple of days at that point, just because of making the most of being home, seeing friends. And then we set up a huge event in a giant warehouse that it was like 8 hours of hanging lights and setting up this giant event. And we had just finished, and the place where we were working was a warehouse that was made for like beach volleyball. So the whole floor of it was sand. We had been moving 4x8 sheets of plywood, one in front of the other, to move a genie lift all over this surface all day long. So we're done. We're standing off on the side. It was Eric and our mutual really good friend Justin and I, kind of standing, a few feet apart of each other in a triangle. And I, for Christmas, had received a new folding pocket knife, definitely a dangerous knife if not taken well care of, and but a useful knife. It was a new Spyderco, and I was standing off on the side, facing away from Justin and to my right side. Eric was to my left about 3 feet. Justin was to Eric's left about 3 feet and facing me in a triangle. I was to my right, flicking the knife open and then folding it closed, flicking it open, folding it closed. A lot of people have seen people do that. I was doing that. Eric said to me that he wasn't comfortable with what I was doing right then. And I stopped and I thought about it and I said, well, I'm standing here in the sand and 180 degrees on my body, all the way to the end of the room in both directions. And then all the way to my right in the direction where I'm flicking the knife, there's nobody. It's sand and then a metal wall. You're to my left a few feet. I think I'm being safe. I'm flicking it in the direction of no people and towards the sand. And I did it once more. And somehow when I flicked it out towards the sand to my right, when you think about flicking open a knife, your hand flicks back a little bit, and on the back motion, it came out of my hand and went across in front of my body and stuck him in the eye.
Yeah.
Like there's no way I could have done that if I had tried for 100 years.
Yeah, my God.
And he covered his eye and bent over, and then I got ready and he lifted it up so I could see it. And his eye was really cut. His eyelid was cut down to here. The lid was hanging over his nose. Covered it back up. I got him to the emergency room in 12 and a half minutes, and they tried to save his eye. They sewed it back together. They couldn't save it, and that put him in a situation where he had to make the decision within 2 weeks to have his dead eye removed or not, because if you wait more than 2 weeks, then you're at risk of something called sympathetic ophthalmia, and that means that your good eye will die. So he had to make this decision rapidly, and he did decide to have it removed and have an implant. And I've taken care of all of the money for everything that's happened on this, which has now been more than 20 years ago. And we navigated this situation and are still very close friends. And I talked to him about doing this before. But I mean, it was absolutely traumatizing, mostly to him because he was maimed, but certainly very difficult for me in my own evaluation of, I've always been someone who enjoys, you know, I guess adrenaline, outdoor activities, jumping
Right.
off cliffs, backcountry,
Yes.
like all sorts of different things. And I had to evaluate my own perspective on
Yes.
risk.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so I talked with our mutual friend about this, and he saw it in the light of the, the Aries journey that
It
you're
is.
talking with me about, which I know very little about. I read
Yeah.
some pages that were shared with me, but I don't
Right.
know
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, well, I'll try to give you the kind of the short version of the Aries journey, because what I've learned, and there's a long story about how I've learned all this, but what I've learned is that we stay the same sign for a long series of lifetimes. We go through 3 stages with each sign, and each stage lasts for 3 or 4 lifetimes. And each sign has a purpose that each person expresses in their own way. So we have our individual way of doing this stuff. But Aries' purpose is the service of life. It's the only sign, I think, with eyes too big for its stomach. It's a very altruistic sign. In order to be able to get into this world and have a separate personality that has a function in the world and can serve the world, you have to develop your ego. You have to develop some kind of internal strength, some kind of separateness. And so in first stage, it's all about developing that. And each Aries does that in their different way. And Aries is a very high energy sign. So being into the adrenaline sports and stuff, that's really very classical Aries kind of thing. And throughout first stage, the person's goal is to develop themselves, to become the hero, to become the best person they possibly could be. But Aries also has this really intense desire nature that just for whatever you want, you just want it so intensely, and it really drives you. And so towards the end of first stage, some Aries people really get this really puffed up ego and start being insecure that they haven't become the great hero, the great famous person, or, the great success they wanted to. And they get frustrated and they may take it out on other people. I don't sense that from you at all. But there can still be this sort of intense desire that's driving you, and you're not really thinking outside of that subjective experience. And I feel like that is what triggered this shift for you. So at the end of first stage Aries, the person does have some kind of experience. I've known people, and I don't feel at liberty to share their experiences because I haven't asked their permission. But I've just seen these situations that were in many ways really so unexpected, just like what happened with you. Very, very different situations. It might have involved a beloved pet in one case, involved a relative in another case. And, it just happened so suddenly. And it was just that moment you weren't watching, or that moment you were pushing your own desires a little bit too intensely. And in your case, I don't even know if you were doing that, but it was enough of an experience to show you I have to be so careful about what I want to do in the moment, about what my drives are. And then that takes the person either into second stage or into third stage. And remembering that you spend several lifetimes in each stage, because you're right at that turning point, you could go straight towards third stage if you wanted to, which is a lot better place to be as far as how you are and how happy you are of life. Aries will crossroad, as I call it, go from first stage to third stage for some reason more often than any other sign. But to go towards third stage is about being very disciplined and being a disciplined expert in a specific area of life, and always recognizing yourself as being of service to life in this particular area. In second stage, which is what we'll call you steadily, that's the path of least resistance, your self-esteem goes down, and you're naturally giving. Aries is naturally giving and naturally unselfish. And you also have Moon in Leo, so you're a caretaker, and you look after people. You're your natural daddy to everybody. So of course you've looked after everything Eric needed. You would have done so much for him no matter what. And in this situation, even more so. But the second stage Aries, the natural generosity comes back, but at the same time, the person can take it too far, and they have no limits. Somebody will want something from them and they can't say no. And you can be pulled by other people's sufferings to the point where you'll put yourself aside and you end up as a doormat. So you want to really be careful about that if you want to avoid just going into a place that's a lot unhappier and also a lot more disorganized, because third stage Aries is quite organized. Now, the other thing that's interesting in your chart, you have Virgo rising, and I often call Virgo rising the safety inspector. It runs in my family. I have it. My younger son has it. My father had it. All of his siblings had it. And that's usually the person who, if I see something that someone could trip over on the floor, I'll always move it. it's just this natural desire to make sure things are safe and looked after. And that's in contradiction to the Aries impulsiveness. But what happened to you, I'm sure it focused you on your Virgo a lot more. So it's just kind of interesting. But I know that I don't remember who suggested looking at the exact events going on astrologically when this happened, which was a super smart thing to do. I don't know why I didn't think of it. It was probably Katya. But I did look at it, and I'm actually I'll share my screen, and I'll try to explain it to you so you can kind of get a sense of what these symbols mean. Oh, wait, I have to click the share button. Okay. So this is your chart. Now this is your sun. That's the symbol for the sun, the circle with the dot in the middle. It's like, like the globe of the sun. And that, of course, is the most important part of your soul. That is your sun in Aries, but it is also, your sun is in the 8th house. So here we see 8. This whole area is the 8th house. Every houses represent life experiences and departments of life. And each house contains many different things. It will rule or correspond to many different areas of life. And one of the things the 8th house has to do with, especially if you have sun in the 8th house, is it's a house of transformation, death and rebirth, major changes. When a person has sun in the 8th house, this is their lifetime to change stages, and it often means they spent too long in a previous stage. So some kind of crisis or difficulty will occur to push them suddenly to other stages. Now, you have Uranus over here. Uranus is a planet of sudden events and accidents, the unexpected, a once in a million kind of experience where lightning strikes right in front of you. Uranus is sitting here opposing. It's interesting, in your story you mentioned the 180 degrees. An opposition is a mathematical aspect of 180 degrees. So Uranus opposes your sun in the 8th house. So it's almost saying, yes, whatever happens to you would be a sudden event, because some people with sun in the 8th house, it may be a long period of time of a lot of stress and strain and struggle that's just so excruciating that it forces them out of the pattern they were stuck in, because everybody's got a different pattern they need to transcend with this configuration. But over here on the outside of the wheel are the planets that were moving around, whether inside your chart, it's a long story, it's called progressions, or the transits, which are the planets that were where the planets were at that time in the sky. Sitting right up here, this red symbol, looks sort of like a scythe to cut the wheat. It's the symbol of Saturn. And the planet Saturn is almost always, with rare exceptions, the most important transiting planet. I say that it says what time it is in our life. It's the hour hand on the clock, and it takes 29 and a half years to go all the way around a person's chart. So every 29 or 30 years, if we get past a certain age, we can look back and say, so what was going on in my life 29 or 30 years ago? You're going to be in a similar kind of overall process as you were back then. So it's an interesting thing to reference if we're at the age where we can do that. But I'm telling you it's 29 and a half years to let you know it's not going to be every day that Saturn is going to sit in this spot. But look at how it's right over your sun. It was almost exactly conjunct your sun at that point. So Saturn's saying what time it is. It says this is the time for this big transformative event to happen. It's pretty incredible. It's spelled right out there. Did you follow what I'm saying?
I mean, I'm following what you're saying. As far as like what it all means is still not super clear to me.
Right. No, you don't need to understand the actual mechanics of it. But essentially Saturn, which is the planet that renovates our lives and that digs things up and says, here's what you have to face now. This is what's being developed. This is what's growing and changing in your life. Was sitting on that pre-planned, your soul chose in this lifetime to go through a very intense event that would move you forward, move you to the next stage very quickly. And this Saturn times it. And Uranus sitting over here implies it's a sudden, unexpected event that could easily be an accident. So
I mean, to me, the incident was so much because he had expressed, his concern about what I was doing, and I took the time to explain why I thought I was being safe.
Yes.
And then to immediately find out that I wasn't being safe. I mean, it was
Yes.
such an in my face,
Yes.
like different perspective on my own judgment. And like I
Yes.
said, perception of risk. Like
Mm-hmm.
it, you know, that's been the hardest part of it. I mean, it's one thing
Yes.
if I had had the accident happen out of the blue, but
Right.
it was so
Yes.
specifically,
Yeah.
where he told me he wasn't comfortable. I told him how I thought I was being safe, and then it happened, and it, yeah, I,
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
what makes you know or see that I'm first stage Aries? Is it just because I had this traumatic event of hurting someone who
It's
I
yeah.
care about?
Yeah. The only other thing it could possibly be is it could be a replay so that you can go back and face those same feelings that were keeping you stuck in second stage. Because what this sun in the eighth house means is that you were stuck in a certain stage and you weren't moving out of it. And there's a stubbornness there. And then you have to, your soul says, okay, look, I can't get myself moving. I've got to jumpstart the car. I've got to do something. So I've got to set something up that's going to push me through. And it's possible you could have been in second stage. One way to tell for sure are the traits that you've had in your life for your whole life up until then. Were there second stage Aries traits? What I talk about second stage Aries, I call them the doormat or the bubblegum machine, because basically if someone's upset and they need your help, you'll drop everything no matter what it costs you to go and help that person, because you don't want them to suffer. You don't want to be selfish. There's a fear of being selfish that second stage Aries people have. That's why they're the bubblegum machine. You put a bit of guilt in the machine, even if it's not your fault at all, you'll give something to them. Too unselfish. Did you
Okay,
have
I mean,
those traits in your life?
I definitely tend to be the person who apologizes and takes
Oh, that's second
responsibility,
stage
whether I
Aries. Yes.
necessarily
So yeah, so
feel like that's
usually sun in the eighth house, most people it's second stage that they're trying to get out of. So it's see the trauma at the end of first stage, somehow it's really valuable for people to revisit it or to revisit the feelings from it. And if you had a situation that replayed those same feelings, it would take you right back to revisit it so you could forgive yourself and then have a more balanced life. So no, I don't know if you did go into first stage actually then, or sorry, I don't know if you were starting out in first stage, but you certainly
interesting.
did have an experience that took you back to what that feels like at the end of first stage, which would be a double whammy because our subconscious never forgets anything, and it would still be carrying those feelings of regret and I'm bad and I can't be so selfish and I'm sorry. I was born in very early second, third stage, so I had tons of second stage traits. And I used to say sorry so much that when I was 4, I remember my mother saying, "Stop saying I'm sorry." And of course I went, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Sure.
Then I felt really bad for saying I'm sorry. So yeah, it's pretty bad. That's how my best friend spots people. She's out somewhere and there's somebody saying I'm sorry a lot. Are you an Aries?
Interesting. Okay. I didn't know that was an Aries thing.
Yeah, that's a second stage Aries trait. So I'm just putting on my blue blockers, doctor's orders, because it's starting to get dark.
Is this chart of the day I was born? Is that what this is?
The inside chart is the chart of the day that you were born, and then all the little symbols around the outside of the circle there are the planets that were either moving through the sky at the time and how they related to your chart, or there are the planets that were progressing, which means when you're born, as the planets moved day by day, they will affect you year by year. There's a correspondence there for some reason. I don't find progressions to be as generally as dramatic. Transits show up almost always. I look at them more. But I just thought, since I didn't know what this was going to show, I just threw it all in there. But it's really, Saturn just sits out there, boom, very, very precise, very specifically stating something. And the eighth house also
Was
has.
there something? Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh, I was gonna.
Go ahead.
You can finish what you're gonna say. I'll still ask.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say the eighth house is also the house of responsibility. So Saturn And Saturn is very serious. It really digs up everything that's going on in our lives and in our charts and says, what is your true responsibility here? How responsible are you? And not only, you know, what part of this is your fault, what part is not, because from a, you know, from a spiritual perspective, whenever something happens, it is 100% our fault and is 100% the other person's fault, because we are all experiencing a certain type of drama as a result of our own needs to unfolding, our own choices, conscious or subconscious. So you needed to really wake up to something, but it's possible that Eric was also drawing it to a degree. I don't know. That's up to him and, you know, his chart, which I don't ask to look at or anything like that. But it's just important for you to understand that it's so, number one, yes, it's so important for you to be responsible and to be careful and you know, really choose your actions wisely, but to all on another level also forgive yourself. It's an interesting kind of paradox, actually.
I mean, when it happened and after it happened, and as we were dealing with everything and him recovering, you know, I openly said that I would never forgive myself until technology had gotten to the point where he had such a cool robot eye that I considered possibly having an eye removed
Yes.
to get what he had.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
certainly haven't hit that yet.
I think, I bet you we will, though. I thought of that already. I thought, you know, this will have a turnaround.
I mean, maybe, but I also,
Yes.
in the last, you know, really more towards the last couple years, like have realized how, not necessarily how, but that the sheer fact that I haven't previously allowed myself any forgiveness and just felt like, you know, I made the worst, you know, I consider it the worst thing I've done in my life. And, because of it having happened and not allowing myself any forgiveness, it, you know, it's negatively affected me in ways I don't totally understand. And I've been approaching forgiving myself, which it's even hard to say. Like, I don't feel like I deserve forgiveness over it. I mean, I know that it was unintentional, but it was, you know, it was intentional for me to take that additional flick after he told me he was uncomfortable with what I was doing. So, you know, no, I didn't intend for the,
of course,
you know, the freak accident that happened to happen, but I also had poor enough judgment that I allowed it to happen.
Yes.
And the way that has affected me, you know, in all the ways I'm not even necessarily aware of.
Yes.
And, you know, through our mutual friend, I had an experience of digging into it in a way that has even really, like, you know, until a couple of years ago, I couldn't talk about this and not, you know, be crying. And it's different now. I'm able to talk about it much more openly, and I don't feel the trauma as much. Like, I don't want to downplay what it was, because, you know, Eric, who's one of the people that I most care about in this world, is living life with one eye because of my mistake, which is, you know, it makes everything harder. He even just in the last year had to have another surgery to tighten up his eyelid because it was uncomfortable and didn't look right, but more importantly, it was leaking. It caused his, you know, his eye to water profusely. And thankfully the surgery was successful and he's a lot more comfortable now. And there may be other surgeries in the future, and there probably will be. But it's, you know, he lives with it every day in a very, you know, it affects everything.
Yeah, it's hard, but that is a classical Aries thing. When something happens, it's almost always to whomever the person cares pretty much the most about in life. I mean, in the two cases I'm thinking of, one was an absolutely beloved pet, the person who's a really intense animal lover, and the other one was the parent that this person had always admired and loved the most. The child that admired that parent the most. And it's just, and because what's happening, if you're replaying that first stage experience, or you're experiencing it for the first time, if you've always said sorry, you are replaying that first stage experience. But when it happens, what it was like before when it happened and what it was like this time, is it just shatters your entire view of reality and your entire view of yourself. And that's necessary because the old self has to go. There's a completely different framework that has to come into place. And for you, if you're doing like a replay of the event, which sometimes people choose to do these kinds of things, it's and the soul chooses it. It is to reconstruct not the old first stage personality, but the current second stage personality, which means to make sure you don't make the mistakes of first stage anymore, or the mistakes of second stage. So ultimately, the self-forgiveness piece is essential too, and I'm sure that's probably why we're talking now, because that's part of that process that you're going through.
Yes. Yeah, that's why I was, open to doing this, because I'm open to digging into this and learning about it and, facing it head on to try
Yes. Yeah.
to try to heal, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing that was probably certainly pretty shattering is you have Moon in Leo. And the moon is the sign we were before we're the sign we are now. And so as we're going through the stages of our sun sign, we relive our moon sign. And Leo has a tremendous amount of practical foresight. So you would naturally have a lot of confidence in your ability to know what you're doing, because generally you really do. Not only that the Aries quite talented, and whatever they do well most of the time, but Leo, they comprehend how things are working. So when you thought you were doing that and then you weren't, it was a shock to the Leo as well. But Leo also, as I mentioned earlier, tends to take care of people and look after people and take lots of responsibility, and usually take too much responsibility in second stage. And so that's another thing, another feature of things that needs to be ironed out. And Leos also, for themselves, they feel as though love is very conditional. So you have to really be perfect, and maybe probably more than perfect. You have to really excel, and then maybe you'll be worthy of love. So this is, wow, and now I just totally dropped the ball. So how could I possibly be worthy of love? And yet for the transition for Leo, it really is about just going and experiencing your inner self and experiencing the beauty and the joy of the inner self and falling in love with who you are in essence, so that you're not carrying the world all the time. So it's like a balance, because your Virgo rising would still, the rising sign is what we're trying to become like in this lifetime. And the Virgo rising, one of the things, it rules many things. It's one of the rising signs that covers so much, and it's different for each person. But one of the things it does cover is, like I said, the safety inspector, being responsible, being of service in a detailed and very practical way. And so it's like, yeah, yes, I remember to do that. And yet you're just doing that because you know it is of value, but your own value you place on yourself is independent of whatever has happened to you, whatever has gone on in your past, because it's a value based on your essence. And that's what you're heading towards as well.
And what is my rising sign?
Virgo. And the rising
Virgo.
sign is the sign that is rising at the moment that you're born. So it's the sign that is in the east. And, there's always some constellation over there in the east. And at the moment that you were born, the non-physical constellation, not the physical constellation, because they're slightly different, was Virgo. That's based on seasons. I'm just trying to be very accurate scientifically, even if it sounds a little more complicated. But basically, Virgo was in the east at the moment you were born. And what that means is that's what you're trying to become more like. So there's a link between sun, moon, and ascendant. Moon is who you were, that you still remember being. It's your deepest natural self. Sun is who you are. Rising sign or ascendant, just two terms for the same thing, is who you're trying to become.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize people's signs changed until you
Well,
said
they
that
do.
that
Well,
means I used
they
to
are
be
your three
Leo.
signs. They are your three signs that you always have in this lifetime. But for this lifetime, you
Uh,
were trying to become more like a Virgo. In this lifetime, you are an Aries, but you are an Aries who remembers being a Leo. So you still emotionally internalize the Leo traits. So when I say
okay.
what you are and what you're going to become and what you were, I'm really talking for more than one lifetime. I'm talking about a bigger picture situation. Although
Okay.
rising signs we may not keep for more than one lifetime, but yes, this lifetime is about Virgo, which is about being analytical also. And that's another reason for being a skeptic. And you and I, we're both Aries with Virgo rising, actually. So of course, I started out as a skeptic, and I see the value in that. Let's be pragmatic. Let's be very realistic. Let's keep our feet on the ground. Let's analyze this and understand what makes it work. My father, with his Virgo rising, when he was a little kid, he always took everything apart because he wanted to know, how does this work? Take it apart and then eventually learn how to put it back together. That took him a bit more time. But that's a Virgo the craftsman. That's another element. And I know the type of work that you do, I'm sure you express that.
Yeah, I've definitely always been someone who tries to figure out how things work, and I'm not comfortable until I understand something
Yeah.
to its depths generally.
Yes, that's right.
Um, which is why the astrology is so intimidating, because there's so much to it when you're
Yeah.
dealing with it with a chart like this,
Mm-hmm.
where I know there's a lot to learn before being able to have any perspective on what I'm really looking at.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, you can learn it step by step, and if there's a real fascination, there's a real calling, you do eventually absorb it. Now, I found that just the way my system has evolved, it's got a lot of real in-depth soul understanding, but it's also helps people learn astrology faster. And so that I found that valuable, especially these days when, not everybody has 10 years to learn something. I find it takes a
Was
life.
there? Did you look at the time of the incident? Did you look at that from an astrological perspective, or does that
I
not really factor in?
I did not do that. I mean, it was interesting because the time is very close to your time of birth. So the time of the incidents, the sun itself was also, I'm pretty sure, probably in the eighth house. So it was reflecting what's in your natal chart, sun in the eighth. Big transformation.
Even though it's a different time of year, but the
Yes.
time of day
The
being the
time of
same.
day, yes, the time of day, no matter what time of year it is, more or less at the same time of day, the sun is going to be in the same house, because the houses are really pie pieces of the sky. So if we look over at the eastern side of the chart, this is where the sun rises, and then throughout the day it kind of goes up. This is the top of the sky, so this is where the sun would be at noon, and now this is where the sun is at 4:30. It's going to set in an hour, a couple of hours, give or take, and this is where the sun sets. So anything we see under the bottom part of the chart would not have been visible when you were born. That was on the other side of the earth at that point in time. So every day
I
around
see.
4:30, give or take, varies slightly by season, and also by where we are geographically, but generally speaking, that time of day, yeah, the sun's sitting in the eighth.
So what is all? I mean, how do I use this to understand for myself, or perspective, or direction, or any, like, what is a way for me to consume the information that you're sharing that I guess would help me grow? Or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, am I thinking about this wrong?
No, God, no, not that I've noticed at all. The very first thing with anything really along these lines is to really listen to what's being said, and listen at the same time to what your own inner wisdom is saying to you, because we've all got an inner voice. We've all got a part of us that senses truth and that reveals truth to us. So that would be my very first thing to say about this. Secondly, you're already on a good path. I think you're doing well with all of this, but certainly, the self-forgiveness piece feels like it's a really important piece of the puzzle. The self-knowledge piece, especially with your Leo, you know, as you go towards the third stage part of your Leo, you're going to really shift around and start getting really excited about yourself. Third stage Leo people fall in love with themselves because they just discover how incredibly beautiful and amazing they are without having to try and do or be anything. And we all are like that, really. But for Leo, that's essential. You're not at that point yet, but that is something that you're going to gravitate to over the next several years. But in the meantime,
Leo, I'm confused about the third stage Leo. I thought I was.
yeah, good question. What happens is that as we go through the 3 stages of our sun sign, we also relive the stages of our moon sign. So,
Okay.
and so as you,
Being previous.
I think you're trying to go into third stage Aries. So as you go towards third stage Aries, you're also going to go towards third stage Leo. And the second stage Leo believes that you are not loved unless you're perfect. You are not loved unless you do things to a really high standard. You're not worthy unless you look after everybody else. Then the moon, the Aries and the Leo together in second stage, I mean, without this stress that you went through, would have been a massive recipe for burnout, because your second stage Aries would have no limits, would not be able to say no to people. Your second stage Leo would say, I got to carry everybody around on my back, and you know, go to Carson, he'll do it for you for free. You know, that's, and you would just sink down into that and cease to be. So it's sort of a weird sort of backwards irony that something that happened that made you question yourself so deeply and made you feel so, you know, unworthy is actually, in the long run, it's a catalyst for getting you to have a totally balanced perspective on yourself and eventually get a real feeling of your worth. And the fact that your best friend is still there with you and is supporting you in that process, it's almost like that's a reflection back to you that this is an important thing for you to go towards. So that's that spiritual level, and that's that level of your own self-development. And then on the personality, practical level, the rising sign is the personality. The rising sign is about Virgo, and it's about being more efficient. But you can't be very efficient when you're beating yourself up. So a third stage Aries is also returning to that purpose of serving life. So if you are a person who serves life, you serve life from the vantage point of the present moment. You do not let the past haunt you, because that can lead to making mistakes also. But you are also constantly aware now of the importance of being safe, being protected, being thorough, being well organized, you know, making sure, I mean, you know, I remember years before it was the law that you had to wear a seatbelt in the car. I always wore a seatbelt just because there's that sense of it's just the responsible thing to do in order to be safe. That's the Virgo rising. That's what's really been, again, reinforced for you through this. But it isn't about beating yourself up in order to do that.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the last sentence? I lost connection for a second.
Oh, okay. It isn't becoming, really honing that sense of responsibility and, you know, intricate, correct process in life is something that your whole experience and your whole chart is working towards. But it's not about doing that by beating yourself up. Maybe beating yourself up sort of was the initial part of the initial catalyst, but it's not part of the long-term process. It doesn't have value for the long term.
I'm definitely very technical and definitely a perfectionist, and
Yes.
you know, I do have self-worth tied to how careful and complete,
Yes.
you know, probably typical struggles of someone who is a perfectionist. But then,
yes.
like, I don't know how much I relate to this, to the selflessness, because,
right.
and maybe it's, I don't know, it's because I have not had children, so
right.
you know, to some degree, I'm selfish in that
Mm-hmm.
I have built my life around being able to do what I like to do, what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I spend a lot of time enjoying outdoor stuff.
Yeah.
I run a company, which definitely is a lot of precision.
That's good.
But I care about people, and I definitely take responsibility for
Yes.
anything I'm involved in. I do, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I am the quickest to to feel emotionally responsible. And some of this stuff, I wonder how much of it could be related to astrology as, you know, as opposed to like parental influence and
Right.
experience like that. Because
You
I
know,
know there's a
yeah.
lot there.
Oh, sure. But you know what's interesting?
Um,
That your whole chart shows your childhood and your family patterns. The entire chart is about your childhood and the influences in your family. And it's interesting because astrology says, well, what is it? Is it free choice? Is it environment? Or is it karmic patterns? Well, when you look at the chart, first of all, when you understand the chart from the true esoteric spiritual perspective, the chart is your choice. You got born when they were playing your song. Secondly, everything in the chart, the whole chart, is all about your childhood. Everything in your chart is all about your karmic patterns and your soul's choices. So the answer to the question about is it karmic, is it environment, is it free choice, is that it's 100% each of those things. You cannot separate them from each other.
okay.
And it's quite a fascinating process to start discovering all of those things.
Just sort
Interesting
that out.
about not
And
having
you
children.
also mentioned,
Mhm.
keep going, go ahead.
Yeah, what interesting what you said about not having any children, because down here at the lower right-hand side of the chart, it's hard for me to see with these silly glasses. There we go. This is the fifth house right through here. And you might notice that this is your own chart and there are no planets in your fifth house of children. So this is not a chart that says, says children are particularly important. But also when I say selflessness, I don't mean the negative kind of second stage Aries selflessness that means that you deny yourself and you don't have any joy and all you do is just give to everybody else and there's nothing left for you. That's unhealthy. I mean a selflessness as an altruism and realizing third stage Aries takes really good care of themselves, because if you don't take care of yourself and you don't nourish yourself and have a good life for yourself, you don't have much to give. If you don't take good care of yourself, your purpose can't really be fulfilled very effectively. So it's a balance that Aries strives for eventually. But the interesting thing is they cannot usually really take good care of themselves until they realize, if they're really got those ingrained second stage Aries traits, they have to realize that if I don't take care of myself, I'm not going to be able to help anyone else. If you try to do it for a purely self-centered reason, it's very hard to do, because you'll always feel guilty. You'll always find something draws your attention and pulls you away from doing what's good for you, until you realize, no, I got to do that for the sake of life.
Okay. I can relate to that as well. I definitely
Yeah.
take care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you mentioned that I'm like on the true cusp. Does
Yes.
that factor into any of this?
I don't think it does. It's interesting because I don't know if maybe your Taurus part wasn't so stuck. I don't know, or maybe there's some other feature of the Taurus that may come up later on. I don't feel it currently applies, as far as I know, to any of what we've been talking about tonight. But a true cusp is the 29th degree of a sign, and it means that it's usually slightly less than a 24-hour period, and it means that you are both signs. You're 100% an Aries and 100% a Taurus. So I don't know. I mean, Taurus is about being the expression of unconditional love, and in first stage Taurus, people love people who don't love them back, and they do it with a very hopeful attitude, because they figure, oh, eventually things will turn out. And then after a while, a few lifetimes of that, and you're never getting loved back, there's a collapse into second stage, where there's a lot of pain around unrequited love and a lot of unrequited love situations. You may not have issues with the Taurus piece. I don't know, because we haven't really talked about any of those issues. But when Taurus goes towards third stage, again, like the Leo part, it's important to fall in love with yourself. And to be an expression of unconditional love is what the Taurus purpose is. And it's just that in first and second stage Taurus, the person forgets on a subconscious level, they forget that being the expression of unconditional love does not just mean loving other people unconditionally. It also means loving yourself unconditionally and letting divine unconditional love express through you. So that is also an element of your soul's purpose. It does tie into the Leo a lot, as the Leo going to third stages third stage Leo in many ways is kind of similar to third stage Taurus, actually.
Hmm. Okay.
So I don't know if you've
It's,
ever had any
it's
crisis around unrequited love in your life.
not particularly, not
Yeah,
that I
I
can
didn't
think
think
of.
so. So, because this, to me, this just indicates the Aries piece for whatever reason. Your Taurus piece is okay. Your Aries piece needed the transformation. Now, if relationship is not a huge, massive factor for you, you might be in that phase of Taurus where you're just taking a break, because there is a phase with the Taurus soul where they say, you know, this crazy love romance thing, it keeps wrecking me. I'm just going to step away from it for a while and look after and build my relationship with myself, build my talents. That's second, third stage Taurus. That's a certain expression of second, third stage Taurus. But again, it is about the
I
points that,
don't really relate to that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I've, I haven't been married, but I've pretty much most of my life had long-term girlfriends, and
Mhm.
am in a great relationship now.
That's
I'm,
great.
definitely prefer being in a relationship.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. So that's good. Yeah. So I think your Taurus probably is where it needs to be. It didn't, it's probably, you probably have elements of being either in second, third stage Taurus or kind of early third stage Taurus. In a good relationship, that would, that definitely goes on with, that goes along with having the Taurus part more developed. So feels like you just needed the Aries boost, not the Taurus.
so what, knowing all this, or like, if I guess assuming all of this is reality for me, that I'm trying to get to third stage, are these is this study of astrology, is it just something you look at to take in as a picture of the way things are, or is it something that you see, oh well, I need to do this or think more of this or address this or pursue this? Like, does it give you some form of guidance as to what's best for you?
Yeah, it's
Like,
more the latter, because it's not so much about the way things are, but it is certainly, it can, in the regards to the way things are, it can give you a bird's eye view of the way things are and why they are the way that they are. But it's better served, it serves us better most of the time to give us what to do, what's the perspective to take, what are the next steps that we need to take within ourselves and within our lives in order to really make progress and fulfill what it will make us happy. And it's different for everybody, because
and
some
what is
people,
your perspective of all this for me, for what I should be going towards, I guess?
well, I mean, the third stage Aries is really about developing a specific specialty in life and becoming an expert at it and being involved in serving life. As you go more towards the third stage Taurus, you'd have a really good loving relationship, and then you would find something. Usually third stage Taurus people are socially active in some way, which means that they are expressing unconditional love on a larger scale. I don't see you at that place now, but over the years, I feel like that's what you'll head towards. And so, they could be politically active, or you could be doing things that just really help people love themselves. It's about some kind of, I guess, a larger mission. And it being, and a key word for the eighth house actually is I care. So, the first stage of it is that massive transformation of yourself. And certainly, to know what our real responsibility is, we have to answer the question, what do I care about? Once you have that question answered and you've begun to transform yourself, then it gives you a huge amount of power. There's a point where the eighth house gives us a lot of power to affect the things we truly care about in life. And with that Taurus piece, it would be on a collective level. And with the Aries piece, it would be as a very disciplined expert who, usually Aries, third stage Aries people, they'll take their given specialty or their realm of interest forward in some way, because they just perfect it to such a high degree that they make new discoveries. You kind of
Oh
end up
wow,
ahead of the
okay,
pack. They don't try to get ahead of the pack, but it's what ends up happening.
interesting. Okay.
but your third stage Leo, because you're going to bring the Aries, the Taurus, and the Leo into third stage. Your third stage Leo, the rule with Leo is it must be fun. So, you know, we had our meeting today an hour later than I'd originally suggested because you were skiing. That's good. That's your third stage Leo. It must be fun. So whatever you're going to do, even if it's
I definitely pursue fun.
yes, yes. So whatever you're doing, even if it's that intricate perfectionistic third stage Aries with the Virgo that is also a perfectionist. So you definitely have two indicators of that perfectionistic tendency, the Sun and Aries towards third and the Virgo rising. The Leo helps to balance it, because once you get your Leo completely into third stage, your Leo will just say, I just want to be in the moment and feel joy. I just want this to be fun. So no matter what you're doing, even though there's going to be work involved, and Aries likes work, but Leo needs fun. They will both coexist.
Okay.
Have you ever had any kind of cause
Where
that
do we
requires you? Because that might bring the Taurus might come out through that as it gets into third stage.
I'm involved politically in my city, like
Cool.
local, not you know, I've been appointed to multiple boards and
Well, that makes
in
sense.
my city, and so I've served the city for over 12 years,
Wow.
and actually last year I did run for city council. I didn't win, but it was quite an
Yes.
experience, and I've gotten more involved, you know, just overall from
That's great.
that. I do like
Mm-hmm.
helping and participating, being a
Yes.
part of community, and
Yes.
you know, I'm part of a group that puts on a lot of big events that are, you know, they're just parties, you know,
Yes.
evolution of raves for people my age.
Right. Cool.
So I do like to participate in and facilitate and
Yeah.
fun. Yeah, so that does seem to fit in with, you know,
Yeah.
what you were saying.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the eighth house is that collective experience. You know, it's really deeply contributing to us and what really matters and what we care about. And you know, the parties piece, that's the Leo piece. So yeah, you're really on a good track. You're doing what you're supposed to do.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else that
You're
you
welcome.
wanted to cover on this?
I don't think so, actually. And thank you for
All
talking.
right.
This was really, I think, a valuable thing. So
I appreciate it. It's very interesting. The whole world I'm not aware of. That's pretty new to me.
yeah, yeah.